Hello and welcome to Artful Inquiry, the Edinburgh College of Arts podcast, where our leading academics discuss their cutting-edge research in the fields of music, art history, design and architecture. I'm Dr. James Cook, Director of Research, and this week I'm in conversation with Dr. Rebecca Collins and Dr. David Cerdeño, and we're going to be listening to dark matter. Rebecca Collins is an award-winning artist-researcher working at the intersection between contemporary performance and sound. Her main research interests are listening, performance, sound studies, and creative critical writing. Her practice focuses on the dynamics of sound operating within specific environments, technologies, and she likes to explore methodologies of writing, making contemporary performance and sound art. David Cerdeño is a particle physicist. His research addresses the origin and composition of the universe, with a special interest in understanding the nature of dark matter. He also participates in experiments aimed at detecting these elusive particles. I think maybe the first thing for us to start with is, what is dark matter?
Well, dark matter is a very abundant new type of matter, of substance in the universe. And we call it dark simply because we have not yet been able to identify it. The other defining property of dark matter is that it doesn't emit or absorb light, and which in fact actually makes it transparent and very, very difficult to detect. The way we know about dark matter is through the gravitational interaction that it has with ordinary matter, and that's actually how we think we have first observed it in the early 20th century. We have seen, for example, that galaxies rotate faster than they should, that clusters of galaxies also have some peculiar velocities that are inconsistent with the matter that we see. And we have also seen the imprint of dark matter in the earliest light that the universe has emitted in the cosmic microwave background. The challenge for us is, of course, what is it? And this is actually a question, interestingly enough, for particle physics, because with the way we understand dark matter is that it is a new type of particle, yet undiscovered, and that may have connection with new physics beyond what we have already been able to describe.
Brilliant, thank you. Rebecca, I suppose the question for you there is, what is an artist researcher? Is that easier to define than dark matter, or more difficult?
Thank you, James, for the provocation. I think that it is equally an uncertain position. Artistic research is something that takes place often outside of the comfort of an artist's studio and is interested in crossing disciplines and in being in interdisciplinary contexts, often in order to ask impossible questions or questions that don't have a very specific, definable answer. So in this case, I was obviously particularly attracted to thinking about the sort of conundrum at the forefront of new physics. I think it's also worth saying that artistic research is also kind of unruly in its methods and methodologies and kind of unfolds in relation to the situations in which it's taking place. So it doesn't have a very defined or specific methodology that you apply a priori to arriving at a place, but it certainly is a way of thinking and doing that unfolds in certain contexts and situations.
So there's that sort of sense that uncertainty and ambiguity is kind of at the centre of both of what you're doing, I suppose. Was that part of what sort of drew you together then as a research team?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was particularly interested in hearing that within science, within physics, there were people grappling with uncertainty and uncertain questions. And this felt to me like a really interesting point to sort of bring artistic research into, and myself as an artistic researcher, into the sort of very close contact, close proximity to physicists who are working with these unresolved mysteries, these known unknowns about the universe. And I have to say, I found it quite comforting to find that there were people who didn't know exactly what they were going to find, although they knew that something was kind of missing or something was unaccounted for in terms of the mass of the universe, is how I kind of had understood it from conversations that I'd had with David.
Great, thank you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that partnership developed then. Sort of, what was the research project?
Yeah, so it was initially to approach the Institute for Theoretical Physics that's based in Madrid on the campus of the Autonomous University, and to ask if it would be possible to spend just over a year within the institute as an artistic researcher to think with and alongside the physicists who were working there, and to organize a series of activities and to think about how artistic thinking could perhaps bring other perspectives to the ways that they think within that research institute within that building without sort of knowing specifically what would come of that, a projection of uncertainty, if you like. And I'd come across David's work from a previous outreach exhibition that he'd been involved in 2017 in London at the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition. And it struck me that the way they were using scientific outreach seemed very similar to kind of artistic research. Although they were describing it in different terms, they had an installation piece, I would call it, that people who were visiting the exhibition site could engage with, which was a way of experimenting with you as a sort of visitor, trying to find dark matter yourself by setting a certain series of parameters in terms of how long you were going to look for the dark matter, at what depth you were going to look for it, and what kinds of materials you were going to use. So this was a kind of interactive, almost like an amusement arcade game that I found very appealing. And I thought, well, these people at the Institute for Theoretical Physics are potentially open to a dialogue around my incorporation in their research institute at a future point. So I think the sort of initial discussions began in 2017. Is that right, David?
Yeah, 2017. And yeah, we normally think about how to communicate our findings or our research to the general public and to also other academics. And in that case, I think the focus was probably a bit more pedagogical. It was hard for me to imagine that as an artistic installation, but I could see how there were similarities in the way that we were approaching, especially the showcasing of the whole research. And yeah, that took us probably a little bit longer to discuss about the upcoming project. Eventually, what happened is that we were also looking for probably less conventional ways to engage with the public originally, and also give us a little bit more freedom to think a little bit outside the box, to pose questions which are probably not allowed within the realm of physics. And the presence of Rebecca actually made that possible. So incorporating her, for example, in my research team, she participated in all the group meetings and in all the discussions that we were having, part of them scientific or also some others where we were trying to also connect that with a little bit more of artistic research. Eventually also within the question of dark matter and also relating it to the possibility of detecting dark matter and identifying it, we came up with probably what is an impossible question, which is, can we listen to dark matter?
Yeah, this became very appealing as an impossible provocation, but also it was linked to the central kind of thrust of the research project, which was looking at different scientific sites and laboratories within Spain, which are using sound or sound analogies to refer to dark matter. So that's how it sort of became connected. And then I was also thinking about how to create a kind of rigorous sensorial experience, aesthetic experience in relation to thinking about dark matter, this kind of mysterious substance that's actually all around us in our everyday and in our ordinary daily lives, which is also something that we talked about.
I remember that one of our first conversations was about our position within the galaxy and what is the amount of dark matter that is surrounding us at the moment and crossing our bodies and without us feeling it. Yeah. And again, from my perspective as a physicist, that's something that I thought was easy to understand. It's like, okay, dark matter particles don't interact with our bodies and therefore we don't feel them. But from a more, let's say, a different point of view, the question is, why our senses are not sufficient to feel them? Okay, what can we do? This brings us again to the idea of a detector, how to enhance our feelings for that. And also about our position, let's say, within the halo of dark matter that surrounds the Milky Way. So Rebecca and I were looking at some numerical simulations, some visualizations on how dark matter is distributed, how it forms some kind of filamentary structure. And I think it was provoking just to think about it in a different way, which was not visual and which also lent itself a little bit to be more oral.
Was that part of the reason for sound then, which is we don't tend to see sound visualized in our day-to-day lives, I suppose, unless something is vibrating particularly violently or you are visualizing it as a waveform. Was that part of the idea then, that the sound is something that we have around us, that most of us do perceive, but that we don't see?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the perhaps we'll talk in a moment about the sound artworks and we can hear a short extract, but certainly that was part of the interest in thinking about sound as like an invisible medium that is all around us. And I'm also particularly interested in my work in the attention that we put to sound. Obviously, we can't close our ears, they're open all of the time, but actually if you do begin to focus on it, then it can lead you to, I guess, having different types of feelings or sensations. And so certainly filling a gallery space for the exhibition, listening to Dark Matter, which formed kind of one of the major outputs of the work, if you like, which took place last spring, 2023. Filling the gallery with sound was part of this way of getting an audience who have not heard of Dark Matter before into the idea that it's all around them. There's a sort of invitation and a provocation to also think about your physical bodily position, that perhaps there's something that you're not doing, and perhaps you need to sort of lie horizontally, or you need to spend a longer amount of time in the gallery in order to be able to hear Dark Matter. So this sort of provocation to the gallery goer to think about how they're putting attention on works. You know, it's always an issue, as a broader issue with staging sound artwork in a gallery, that people are looking for things to look at. And so, you know, in the setting up the exhibition, people would say, well, where are you going to put the objects? When I was doing the lighting, it's like, well, the objects, you know, the sound. They're like, oh, only sound. Well, you know, actually sound is everything. You know, sound is a big part of it. So absolutely, we were interested in exploring that. And I think sound can also kind of lend itself to the imagination in ways that can be perhaps more speculative, or can lead you into sort of potentially other kind of sensorial realms that might kind of lend themselves to these things that we are uncertain about or kind of yet to know. So it might be worth talking a bit about one of the first compositions that we worked on in the project, called Composing with Dark Matter. And this was made in collaboration with French composer Aude Asiganolasa. And I invited Aude to dialogue with myself and David to think about what dark matter is and how we might offer a kind of listener experience of dark matter. And we shared the videos of the Galaxy Halo numerical simulations with Aude, and she came up with a 11.5-minute composition. And that when you listen to it, you normally would listen to it with kind of binaural headphones, and it had a series of sensors along the top and was connected to a small bespoke dark matter detector, with the idea that as you're listening to the piece, you're also listening to the dark matter in the room, and you're also, through the sensors on the top of the headset, listening to your own sort of observations or thoughts about the dark matter that is kind of traversing your body at this time. So it was really about trying to have an intimate encounter with dark matter through the sound work and through the setup of the sound work itself.
It was very interesting to actually see Aude coming with the idea of having a detector, because that was also somehow linking to the privileged position of the observer within the dark matter halo, and also probably connecting also with the idea of how you're moving within that halo and what is the effect on the dark matter signature that you might observe. And I think it's interesting because it also is very similar or completely analogous to how we're looking for dark matter experimentally. So we do expect, for example, that our experiments are observing a kind of modulation as the Earth moves around the sun and the sun moves inside in the galaxy. So I think it was a very interesting observation on her side, and it also made us think a little bit different, well, as the project continued, yeah.
I think the other interesting thing about it is we tend to think of kind of astroparticle physics as being out there, or in the galaxy, but we're also part of that galaxy. We're sort of part of a planet and a planetary structure. So to bring it into the everyday and to think about how your body is having these unknown particles sort of move through you on a daily basis, that they don't cause you any harm. There's no need to be sort of alarmed. But I think that's also part of it, to sort of bring an awareness to the sort of everydayness of this. I think often scientific research can have its kind of spectacular sides when you have kind of big discoveries and so on. But I think there's also something about the ordinariness and the mundaneness of scientific mysteries that I think can sort of inspire awe and kind of provoke thoughts about how we're part of a broader kind of planetary ecosystem as well, if you like.
I suppose bringing the listener in as part of the sort of composition, almost, in that it's reacting to their movement as well, is quite a nice way of bringing their person into the experience in a more direct way.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost making them feel as though they really would be able to detect dark matter. I mean, also, James, if you do detect dark matter while we're recording this podcast, do let us know. Just raise your hand.
But shall we have a listen to that piece then?
That would be great. Yeah.
Concerning dark matter. How much is there? Where is it? And what does it consist of?
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I was wondering if you could talk through a bit of the process that you went through working with the composer then on this. How much latitude did they have in terms of the approach to musical language? How much, well, I suppose both of you feeding in terms of ideas into that?
I'd worked with Aude Asiganlasa before, actually, on a previous project, so I was aware of her practice in kind of electroacoustic composition, and I think I was interested in her sort of provocation in terms of leading the listener really on a journey. So the piece has a visual component as well. So the way that the collaboration unfolded was through a series of meetings and what I would describe as kind of dispatches to the composer, where talks were shared that David had given with qualitative information on what dark matter is, and a sort of exchange based on also what types of research data she might need in order to create the work itself. So there was a number of sort of back and forths with this kind of dispatch idea, where then she would kind of send an initial sketch of what she was working on, and then maybe ask us for more material, and then we would sort of share our thoughts on what she had shared with us. So it was a sort of a back and forth approach over a couple of months. And then the work was first shared in a workshop setting. So another part of the project was a workshop that I organized in the Basque Country in the north of Spain for 3 days with physicists and artists. So this was a moment to explore uncertainty together through both a series of kind of somatic body-based practices, as well as sharing the sort of first version of this composition and some more kind of formal research presentation.
We were also trying to avoid establishing a hierarchy in which there is a clear scientific message, and then the artist, or in this case the sound artist, has to respond to that. And also we were trying to avoid just taking data raw and trying to sonify them. So in this case it was more about trying to meet at the same level and trying to find a reaction not only on the side of the artist in that case, but also from my point of view as a scientist to also try to react to that. So in that sense, I think that probably that methodology was being developed as we were working together. And that's something that's actually an aspect of the work that I enjoyed very much. For example, as Rebecca said, we shared some material with Aude in the beginning, but I was more interested in what were the questions that she was having after doing that. Okay, and most of our conversations were actually, she was probably leading them. Okay, it's like, okay, this is the aspect that I'm more interested in what you've shown to me. For example, she was very interested in this idea of traveling through the galaxy, and so that's where we probably focused a little bit more.
I think one of the most brilliant moments for me was the first time you heard that piece, and you said it was the first time you'd had a kind of embodied experience of listening to your research, that you kind of felt that despite having been studying and researching dark matter for many decades, that you had a very kind of corporeal reaction to it.
We are used to seeing, probably to visualizing it more, okay? So numerical simulations for dark matter, you see them on the computer screen, you never listen to them. So there are some aspects that of the dark matter halo that are the substructure, the granularity, that are somehow identified also in the music that Aude produced.
Do you think there was an advantage then, that idea of the non-representational aspect of music and sounds, does that give some of the power there? You're able to represent something that is more abstract, perhaps, through something which is generally by nature non-representational?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a real interest in sound for this reason. And I think in my broader practice, that's why I'm interested in both listening and sound as artistic forms, because ultimately there isn't a sort of direct equivalent, but it gives you a kind of sense of this sort of really enriching kind of sensorial experience that you don't have to necessarily categorize or classify. I think it's more interesting than reducing something to a series of boxes or to a series of constraints. So I think that it enables really this kind of imaginative journey to kind of take off, but it's also kind of evocative of things like journey, of things like space travel, of things like this sort of granularity that it brings as well, and the unknown. But there is a sense that you're experiencing something, you're getting a feeling for something, even though you can't quite place your finger on it. And I think that the best kind of sound and music works, I think, really do that.
I was interested as well in the position of text within the piece. And at first I was thinking, is that sort of being used diacritically? Is there a scientific message? And I wondered at first when I was listening, is the text giving you that? Is that the research hypothesis which is coming out? But then actually it pretty quickly becomes abstracted in itself. And are you seeing the text there as just sort of just one sound within the overall makeup of the piece? Is the text just another instrument? Or was it there to try and convey something of the sort of scientific aspect as well?
That's a great question. I think that for me, it's sort of another element that's kind of in the mix there. It's another texture, if you like. And I think that the sort of quality of the voice is this slightly kind of, robotic, sort of, artificially generated voice. It's also not looking to be a kind of scientific authoritative voice in any way. And the repetition of that voice makes you sort of realize that it's perhaps not that you need to grasp something specific from it, but that it's another kind of layer. It's almost kind of hypnotic in a way as well, the way that it kind of continues to repeat.
Yeah, the text was probably, if you think about it, probably is the most objective part of the of the piece when you see it separated from the rest of the piece. So those bits of text did come out from some of the talks that I gave, that we also passed to all. But the message or the way that they were used, they completely changed in the final piece. So although again the text was objective in the beginning, it was used as another element. And I'd say it was very quickly becoming very abstract.
Yeah, it's almost like it's querying its own authority kind of from within the piece, right. With this sort of ongoing question about what is this material. And, I guess now thinking about it also leads me to think about, should we know everything? Should we know everything about the universe? So there's some things that we won't be able to know or to understand, so it's kind of perhaps querying that idea of classification within kind of scientific knowledge.
One more question on the piece. The choice of broader musical language there, it's quite diverse in the wash of sound at the beginning, and towards the end you've got a sort of more traditional, I suppose, post-romantic piano language. I was kind of interested in the decision process. Did any of the experimental aspects around that play into choice of texture, timbre, harmony, melody, or is this a composer's reaction to those things? Is it purely down to the composer here, or were there experimental aspects that were drawing from the data?
I think it was probably the artist's reaction. This dichotomy does remind me a little bit of the differences that we see in the behavior of dark matter at large scales and at small scales. So there's always a way to kind of rationalize it, but I don't think we probably need to do that.
I think that part of Aude's style is often to incorporate classical elements, part of her kind of background and her training as a composer. And now that you've asked me that question, I'm, sort of trying to read it as though, she is incorporating this sort of reference to kind of early 20th century, the sort of naming of dark matter and these kind of moments. But I think it's not totally accurate that total logic is thought through. So there is certainly freedom of the composer within that. The brief wasn't so specific that it would drill down into those areas, because I think on the whole we were more interested in the sense of a journey, in the sense of this non-representational aspect, sharing kind of details of the project and of the process as it's unraveled.
Yes, I suppose it's important when you are an artist researcher to give that space for genuinely creative responses. It can be dangerous, I suppose, to constrain yourself too much and to kind of rob yourself of the freedom to be an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it certainly wasn't about trying to say the whole thing has to be in a specific style. That would be a different type of project, certainly, and could be a very interesting one. But I think it was more about initially sort of the invitation to experiment with this idea of how would you lead a listener into this unknown territory, with the sort of caveat that I certainly wasn't looking for a direct data sonification of any numerical simulation of any kind, because I think for artistic research that has less returns. I think that it can be interesting in the service of communicating research from other disciplines, but I think I'm always looking for what's returned to artistic research, what's returned to art as main thrust of my work.
One of the interesting aspects that you mentioned at the start was the idea that when you're listening to this piece, you're holding the dark matter detector and you're sort of moving through the space, and that's giving live additional aspect to that, which of course, sadly, we have lost here in the studio, and the listeners back home will also not be able to experience. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit through the process of dark matter detection.
Yeah, we don't really know what dark matter is, which makes its detection actually extra difficult. We're not even sure what is the signal that we're looking for. What we try to do is to design experiments which are sensitive to a range of different signals that we hypothesize that dark matter can produce, and then look very patiently and try to observe those. One potential way to look for dark matter is to design an experiment that is sensitive to dark matter collisions, that produces, for example, light or an electric current when a dark matter particle collides with it. In order to avoid cosmic radiation and a big part of, if you want, noise or background, we take these experiments underground to laboratories which are probably a couple of kilometers underground. And the Earth crust blocks us, protects us from this other kind of noise, of radiation. So it is in this kind of underground laboratories that, again, dark matter experiments are situated, and where we also saw that it was probably a very good connection to your project, because it is related also to what they call cosmic silence. these detectors are trying to avoid any other possible type of noise. Of course, we are talking about noise in a more general sense, not only in the sense of sound, but this idea of cosmic silence can also be suggestive, at least for the sonic part of the project.
Yeah, so as part of the research, we visited the Canfranc Underground Laboratory, which is situated beneath the Pyrenees in a disused railway tunnel connecting France and Spain. And there, these dark matter detectors are very kind of sensitive experiments that are trying to, I guess, capture this dark matter particle in some ways, and often sort of using very radio pure materials as well. And this idea of cosmic silence I just found to be kind of, poetically very eloquent and almost sort of too poetic to do anything with. But actually my lived experience of being in the laboratory was that it was actually very noisy in terms of a sort of listening experience, but partly due to sort of maintenance work that needs to take place on the experiments, and the fact that it is really referring to cosmic silence as a kind of metaphor for stopping the particles that we already know about kind of coming in. That was one of the laboratory visits where some field recordings were taken, and the second visit was...
It was in Valencia, in the acoustic laboratory for our astroparticle search. Another way to look for dark matter is what we call indirectly, through the products of its annihilation or decays in the universe. Okay, and one of such products, for example, can be neutrinos, which are also very elusive particles, but at least particles that we know exist, which obviously makes them easier to detect. This group here is participating in an experiment that is called KM3Net, and before it was also called OYE, another experiment that they had, underneath in the depths of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so they've essentially instrumented some detectors to look for the light and the sound produced by exotic particles colliding in the depths of the Mediterranean Sea.
So hydrophones are situated about 2.5 kilometers below the surface. But I think to date, they've heard more about kind of conversations between dolphins and cetaceans than these collisions between particles. But it's a very interdisciplinary experiment. There are bioacousticians and marine biologists who are also working with the experiment in order to use the data, because it allows them to have hydrophones in the water for kind of longer than they would otherwise. And for me, it was also interesting to think about what is the role of an artistic researcher within these kind of bigger interdisciplinary projects, rather than sort of someone who's brought in at the end to kind of share the findings, if you like. So this was also kind of particularly interesting to think about how the sort of collisions between particles might be kind of sonorously detected at some point as well. So in the second piece, we're going to be listening to Energies, Not Forms, Not Figures. There are some extracts from field recordings that were taken at the Canfranc Underground Laboratory and from the other field visit that we just mentioned.
Energies, not forms, not figures, cosmic proportions abound. Stay to sift and sieve molecules till morning. Not a molecule, no, an atom. An invisible atomic component. A neutrino? Dark matter? It's seasonal, some will say. A laugh secludes security. Ideas illuminate points on a line. Concerns quiver. Dust free for now. Energies, not forms, not figures. 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 Energies, not forms, not figures.
nonsensical stuff invades your everyday, swirling around a constant hum that won't go away. Indeed, in existence from our very first days, our very first hours, our very first minutes, our very first seconds. Indeed, 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 long before they were even called hours, minutes, seconds. Yeah, an ongoing drone of discontent falling over and over and over again on deaf ears. And guess what? There are still trillions and trillions and trillions of her zipping through your little nose right now, and in the middle of the night, barely audible articulations erupt in peaks and troughs. Quote, she is seasonal, unquote, a position impossible to reapprove. Don't worry, only weakly interacting. Yeah, low energy remnants. Okay, soft presence. Yeah, dedicate decades in international collective attempts. Note, she eludes the exact pinpointing of a place. Remember, parameters help by precisely gesturing to where she is not. Finding out more nothings will lead to somethings. Quote, nothing will come of nothing, unquote.
Brilliant, thank you. I suppose it's another one there where there is text, but it's quite abstracted. In fact, sort of the only traditionally metrical aspect of that is that kind of repeated text in the middle there, which I thought was quite powerful. Although I must admit to being quite unsettled by the the recordings from Under the Sea. I don't know whether I feel worse about them knowing that they were recorded 2.5 kilometres under the sea.
Yeah, maybe it's worth saying that most of the recordings are actually from the Canfranc Underground Laboratory under the rock. We listened in the field visit to the underwater data, but due to some data protection reasons, we weren't able to incorporate those. But yeah, the recordings are also, to a certain extent, slightly warped or changed or altered, again, because we're not looking for a kind of direct representation of the experience, but about thinking of how these sort of ordinary environments have got a kind of uncanny element to them somehow that sort of take you out of the everydayness of what it is to be a lab technician working in this environment, or to be a physicist who's engaged in an experiment there, and to thinking about how these kind of everyday, ordinary kind of work scenes are also making us think about other more surreal experiences or feelings.
One of the things that I suppose interests me as a research director is I'm really interested in how people work together. I'm really interested in that creative process between different researchers. And I'm always really interested in seeing how intensely interdisciplinary projects work together. And I think there's probably no better example than this, where you've got really quite seemingly disparate approaches and seemingly disparate traditions, which actually clearly have so much in common. Rebecca, has engaging with a theoretical physicist and with theoretical physics changed at all your own practice as a researcher?
This is an interesting question to answer. I think being kind of embedded in the Institute for Theoretical Physics over such a long period of time made me think, I guess, quite differently about how I conduct my research, and I think probably take sort of more courage with the sort of uncertainty and indeterminate ways in which research unfolds. I think I got great strength from hearing that from people working in the sciences as sort of a way of kind of feeling more legitimate about how artistic research also unfolds in similar ways. I was also really moved actually by the disposition of the senior and also sort of more junior members of the Institute for Theoretical Physics, for their willingness to kind of engage in my impossible provocations and to be part of the research project. And it's worth mentioning the specific interaction with the dark matter research group, who I asked them to think about what it would be like were they to detect dark matter and what a kind of visual sketch of that would look like. So this I sort of launched on them at the kind of closing of a weekly meeting, deliberately giving them not enough time to really think about how to draw this, but just to kind of instinctively kind of go with a visual representation. And this was also incorporated into the exhibition itself, as the text from the piece that we were just listening to was displayed on the windows in the gallery. So the gallery had sort of 12 2-meter high windows, and the text kind of slowly arrived to also replicate this potential idea that dark matter is somehow seasonal or has some kind of annual modulation. So for me, I think it's brought me courage to think about how my research can intersect with different disciplinary fields. And I think Going forwards, I would certainly think about approaching other research areas to sort of see if I could also situate myself within their disciplinary work environments, as I believe it's got really strong returns both for artistic research and for other disciplines themselves.
And David, I suppose the same question there. You've come to this as a theoretical physicist, and from the sounds of it, you sort of came into the process thinking about how you translate science, how you convey science to people more generally.
It has indeed, yeah. And actually having Rebecca, for example, integrated in a group for over a year had a big impact in the way that we think about communicating science, also allowing us to pose ourselves these impossible questions, which obviously from the point of view of scientific theory, maybe they don't take you anywhere, but they're always encouraging you to look in different directions or think about different ways to communicate this kind of problem. So I would say have had a very big impact, yes.
Great, thank you. If you'd like to find out more about the research project discussed in today's episode, you can look at the show notes here on Spotify. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about research at ECA in general, please do look at our website at www.eca.ed.ac.uk/research. If you've enjoyed this episode of Artful Inquiry, please do hit the subscribe button now to be notified of new episodes in the future. And of course, do share the podcast with people who you think might enjoy it. All that remains is for me to thank our guests this week, Dr. Rebecca Collins and Dr. David Cerdeño, and of course you, our listeners. Next week, we'll be talking to Dr. Una McGloin and Professor Raymond MacDonald about diversifying improvisation. Between recording this podcast and its release, we received the tragic news of Rebecca's death. Rebecca was a well-respected and much-loved colleague who will be sorely missed by all of us at Edinburgh. Our thoughts are with her friends, family and loved ones, and we dedicate this episode to her memory.